time of year with this sun beaming down here. If I have a halo, I assure you it's the sun. Someone once told me I had an aura that jumped, she said it jumps when you preach and it goes blue. Well, what do you do with that information? The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It flames out like shining from shook foil. Gerard Manley Hopkins. You ever been out in nature and felt a reverence there? Perhaps you've stood inside a big old redwood tree as I have and felt its power pulsing around you. Or when you looked out at the ocean to consider its sheer size and teeming life. Or perhaps when you watched a butterfly flitting about through flower stems. We often say that human beings have got souls, and that part of us which is our essence, which having lived and been shaped here by reality, moves into another dimension at the end of our lives and goes back to the Creator in joy. But does the natural world have a soul? Well, Plato thought so. He said the cosmos is a single living creature which contains all living creatures within it. Cicero agreed with him. He said everything is alive, everything's interconnected. And the Jewish scriptures say the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and all they who dwell therein. Christian scriptures say that all things are alive with the life of Christ, and that in him all things consist. The Buddhists say that every miracle you work in your life is a blessing to life itself, and the Muslims say in the Quran, Allah, there is no God but He. His are all things in the heavens and in the earth. Christian Gnostics carried this tradition forward, and the chemists as well, the alchemists. When the Western Church encountered pantheism, people who saw nature as animate with God's Spirit, the Church Fathers became fearful and decided to teach that the world was neither sacred nor divine. There was this transcendent deity that was the source of all creation, and humanity lived in a kind of exile from heaven in a state of sin. And this doctrine created a split between matter and spirit, causing the world to be seen as separate from its creator. Pelagius, a 4th century monk, didn't buy this split between matter and spirit. Writing to an old friend of his, he said, "Look at the animals roaming the forest. God's Spirit dwells within them. Look at the birds flying across the sky. God's Spirit dwells in them. Look at the tiny insects crawling in the grass. God's Spirit dwells within them. Look at the fish in the river and the sea. God's Spirit dwells within them. There is no creature on earth in whom God is absent. The presence of God's Spirit in all living things is what makes them beautiful. And if we look with God's eyes, nothing on earth is ugly, not even Derek's new bulldog." Now, Pelagius was condemned as a heretic. The Renaissance was the time when once again the concept of animus mundi, or the world soul, was revived as the Greek world was rediscovered. Stephen Heller, a Sufi, writes, "In the Renaissance, the world soul was understood as a spiritual essence in creation, guiding and unfolding the life of creation. The world soul was the creative principle that the Renaissance artists sought to channel in their work. Their art was based upon the same sacred proportions that they found in nature, and they understood the imagination as a magical power that can lure and channel the energies of this anima mundi, or world soul." The Western Church asserted itself at that time and re-established this split between matter and spirit. And science, after Descartes, jumped on this convenient wagon, and nature became once again a machine. And you know, we still perpetuate this idea today to our peril as the world becomes our mechanical plaything that can somehow sustain unlimited population growth and the ruthless exploitation of resources and withstanding all of our abuse. of environmental degradation, James Lovelock, an English chemist, proposed in the 1970s a new, but actually very old theory, which he called after the Greek goddess Gaia. The Gaia hypothesis proposes that all organisms, organic and inorganic, are integrated to form a single and self-regulating force, maintaining the conditions for life on the planet. This is how it works. The Gaia hypothesis focuses on how the biosphere and life forms contribute to the stability of global temperature, ocean salinity, and oxygen in the atmosphere, and keep them in a stable, sustainable relationship. Initially received with much hostility by the scientific community, it's now incorporated into the discipline of Earth system science. The old Celts teach us, and the Native Americans, that what befalls our soul soon befalls the soul of the world, and vice versa. Do you find yourself discouraged today about the world? Or the war in Afghanistan, or the challenge of Iraq, or the cruelty of Syria to its people, the nuclear arming of Iran? Are you upset as you hear about fishermen in Alaska asking their representatives in Washington for action to control carbon emissions because the acid oceans have now begun to affect fish stocks? The fishermen know that the acidity is coming from fossil fuels, but the representatives want it all. Good fisheries and jobs coming from fossil fuels. Does the oil companies lobby for more drilling rights in Alaska? Perhaps, like the fishermen, you feel rather helpless as you're watching climate change move from theory to dominance of our weather reports, with wildfires across the Midwest and Colorado and now Montana, with rising temperatures, 2,000 records broken this past week alone, hurricanes, tornadoes increasing in intensity, and you say to yourself, well, what can one person do about the problems of the world anyway? And as these things happen, do you find yourself astonished by an overwhelming sense of helplessness that can kind of wash over you? You know, at first, our reaction may be to try and arm ourselves against despair as these waves wash over us with ever-increasing intensity driven by the media. We feel so small that there's no hope. We move our lives into a mode of quiet desperation in order just to survive and cope. But this kind of despair is toxic stuff, and it's contagious, unfortunately. So instead of going into despair, we need to both heal the world and let the soul of the world heal us. We need to stand beneath that redwood, gaze out into the ocean, and watch a butterfly flit about the flowers. And there we need to let the divinity, that deep down sweetness of things, heal us. We must do all in our power, I think, to resist these feelings of hopelessness. They don't serve us. Instead, we must call for strength from the Creator God, the God who has been active with all peoples from the dawn of time, the God who is found in all things bright and beautiful, and all creatures great and small. When St. Patrick was working in Ireland, he drew on an ancient piece of possibly Druidic poetry to renew his flagging spirit, which celebrates this world soul. I want you to picture Patrick at the beginning of his day, claiming these words to drive his discouragement away. You can do the same. I arise today through the strength of heaven, the light of sun, the radiance of moon, the splendor of fire, the speed of lightning, the swiftness of wind, the depth of the sea, the stability of the earth, and the firmness of rock. What a way to get out of the bed in the morning. You thought it was coffee, didn't you? One mistake we often make is to think we have to take on the whole world at once. That somehow, because we know about some suffering somewhere in the world, that it's our problem to solve, and so we feel overwhelmed. That's not going to help heal the world's soul. Better it is to take one little problem at a time. We can effect change with one cause, one challenge, one little thing that's fallen out of harmony with the world, even if it's just a little thing. For we can all be healers wherever we touch, and there are many of us. Whenever we feel discouraged, let's remember Margaret Mead's words, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." She says, "Never depend upon institutions or governments to solve any problem. All social movements are founded by, guided by, motivated and seen through the passion of the individual." You know, there are levels of action we can take when we're about to heal the soul of the world, from the apparently small to the more significant. You've no doubt heard of the butterfly effect. The phrase refers to the idea that a butterfly's wings create tiny changes in the atmosphere that may ultimately alter the path of a tornado, or delay, accelerate, or even prevent the occurrence of a tornado in another location. Note that the butterfly doesn't cause the tornado. The flap of the wings is part of the initial conditions. One set of conditions leads to a tornado, the other set of conditions does not. The flapping wing represents a small change in the initial condition of the system, which causes a chain of events leading to a large-scale alteration of events. Had the butterfly not flapped its wings, the trajectory of the system might have been vastly different. It's possible that the set of conditions without the butterfly flapping its wings is the set that leads to a tornado. Now, last Saturday, I was in the Consumnes River Nature Preserve. And when I was returning, I saw a butterfly flapping its wings in a kind of suspended animation. And as I approached, I saw that it was caught in a spider web and was quite obviously not happy. I chose to intervene, and I broke the web, but the butterfly continued to struggle in my hand, not being able to fly. And on closer examination, I saw that the web was wrapped around its wings, so I carefully started to remove the web. I was successful, and the butterfly went on her way. What did she think happened to her, I wonder? And did I stop a tornado from coming? We shall never know, but I can tell you, I was elated. Dan West was in Spain in the Civil War, 1937 to 38. People were starving around him, and his job was to ration out milk to little children. And he was always running out of milk and feeling absolutely terrible about this, because the children that didn't get the milk would starve to death. And he was supposed himself to drink a quart of milk a day to sustain himself, but he felt so terrible doing so because that same milk was denied to starving children. So Dan, one day, seated alone underneath an almond tree, found the soul of the world beginning to speak to him. And after observing the frustration of so many desperate people, Dan became aware of the bubbling stream and the soft grass beneath his hands. These people had been farmers. If they had cows, they would once again be able to supply milk for their desperate children. These thoughts came. Could he possibly get cows sent from his own state of Ohio? Could he heal the situation? When he got back to the States, he was greeted by his children, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old child. They were rosy-cheeked farm children. And as he watched them drink their milk, in Dan's eyes were the images of the children of Spain, skinny children, with haunting, sad eyes. He'd love to share the bounty of America with those sad eyes and see them glow with gratitude. But what could one man do? That one man decided to talk. He talked about it to anyone who would listen. He was eager, dynamic and passionate. Even the children stopped playing to listen when he would get up to speak at a public gathering. And he had a vision. Green pastures, healthy cows, giving wholesome milk to healthy children. Would people help at his church, in his own family? Would his neighbors help? His wife said to him, "You know, Dan, this is an impossible dream." But she helped him anyway because she loved him. One day a farmer said, "I'm going to donate a cow." Another said he'd feed the cow until it was time to be shipped. Soon there were questions at every meeting. What would they do with the milk as it was being shipped across the ocean? Throw it overboard? Who was going to milk the cows? who would look after them on board ship. And some bright spark spoke up and said, well, if we ship heifers over there, there'll be no milk problem, and they'll have a calf, and that calf can be given away too. So he talked to city folks, and they got on board with the idea they would help finance it. Cowboys volunteered to give help on board and look after them until they got to their destination. I know about cows, said one boy. I'm gonna go. Go he did. Took 6 years for that dream to happen, until in 1944, Faith, Hope, and Charity, along with 13 of their girlfriends and one calf, were sent to Puerto Rico. After the Second World War was over, shipments did go to Spain. Heifer International is big today. Millions of families have been helped by the power of one man's dream. And this dream is still healing the soul of the world. Cows have been exchanged for guns in Kosovo, and warring tribes in Africa and street gangs in America have learned that cooperating in farming ventures heals the human soul at the same time as it heals the soul of the world. In Alaska, in the town of Kodiak, the fishermen can't wait any longer for action from Washington, and so they've taken things in hand themselves, and they've built wind generators on the tops of the hills that now supply 95% of the power for Kodiak, and it's clean. Today, as people of faith who want to make a difference, we don't need to be discouraged. We can invoke the strength of the sun, the moon, the splendor of fire, and the stability of the earth as the sea swirls around the eternal rocks, for the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It'll flame out like shining from shook foil. And you say to me, oh, all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And yet for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights of the black west went off, all morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Spirit of God over the bent world broods with one breast.